So I was taking a walk in 2009. My partner and I had just arrived in Paris, jet-lagged and hungry. I fumbled through some of my French to get us baguette sandwiches, and we sat ourselves down on some public seating along the Seine. But this isn't a picture from that trip, and the two people walking together on the right aren't random passers-by. They are the actors Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke, and this still is from the 2004 movie Before Sunset by Richard Linklater. I watched Before Sunset again recently, and it's a classic example of a walking movie. I think film is good at capturing a walk, particularly good at giving the audience a chance to notice the details of a setting and experience the pleasure of moving through it. All of Before Sunset is structured around the walk, turning the film into an almost real-time experience of walking in Paris. A major accompaniment to walking in a movie is often conversation, and Before Sunset uses conversation as the major action in the plot. Let's get this Yupo framed with some painter's tape. Much of the conversation between Celine, Delpy's character, and Jesse, Hawke's character, is steeped in memory and the act of remembering. This is such a prominent theme that I couldn't help having my own memories of Paris continually resurface. This rewatch of Before Sunset was mainly shaped by Celine and Jesse's feelings about their memories together, and my own feelings about my memories of Paris. Now for some underpainting for the buildings in the background and the riverbank in the foreground. Before Sunset is part of the Before trilogy. Spoilers ahead for Before Sunset and the trilogy as a whole. The three films in the series follow the relationship between Celine and Jesse over 18 years. When they first meet in Before Sunrise, meet again in Before Sunset, and do a lot of reflection on their relationship in Before Midnight. My favorite of the three is Before Sunset, because I prefer romances involving people over the age of 30, and I think Delpy's and Hawke's performances in this one are the best of the three. But this rewatch pointed to another reason. I like it the best because it's set somewhere I've been. The other two movies in the trilogy take place in Vienna and in Greece, neither of which I've traveled to. I'm using some iridescent silver to start shaping the row of buildings on the opposite bank of the river. I first visited Paris in 2001 when I was studying French in a nearby city. Those first trips I took into Paris are fairly romanticized in my mind. Because my day-to-day life as a student was happening somewhere else, my memories of Paris in 2001 are of exciting weekend trips filled with art and cafes and punctuated with scenic views of iconic locations. The romantic idea of Paris I had built up in my mind before I went there was mostly confirmed by the fun and intensity of my experiences in those short visits. I'm hoping this interference violet gives some of the purplish tinge from the movie still. These rosy feelings I had were mirrored in Before Sunset by Celine and Jesse reconnecting with each other for the first time in 9 years. Jesse is there in Paris because he's finishing up a tour promoting his novel, which he based on their first encounter in Before Sunrise. Jesse has some time before he has to catch his flight home, so they decide to walk to a cafe to catch up. While they are both trying to play it cool and seem sophisticated and worldly, I could really feel their unspoken excitement to see each other again. I too wanted to seem sophisticated and knowledgeable the next time I went to Paris. It was several years later, and this time I took my partner. It was his first time to Paris, and the trip was filled with the excitement of sharing the city with him. Behind all that desire for worldliness, I had an eagerness to connect with Paris again, to see places I remembered, and also to get even more information about this place I enjoyed so thoroughly. We took long walks everywhere and went to parts of the city I hadn't been to before. The weather was gray and cold. There was even a hailstorm, but it didn't matter. We were having a great time. I'm never quite sure how much detail to do in the background when I'm planning to paint over most of it later. Anyway, Celine and Jessie decide to leave the cafe and continue their conversation while walking along the elevated park, Coulée Verte René Dumont, also known as the Promenade Plantée. At this point, their conversation hits a few snags. They have a couple disagreements that seem less playful and less flirty than earlier. And they have a mini argument about the details of what happened between them their first night together. The prickly tone of their conversation is contrasted with the golden light dappling their path and the lush plant life surrounding them. All my good memories of Paris set me up for a surprisingly different experience when my partner and I went back in 2009. On that trip, we also walked along the Promenade Plantée, but I wasn't experiencing much delight from my memories of previous trips. I was irritated and unenchanted by Paris, though the weather was sunny and even warm at times. At one point, we visited the National Library, and the site was so unpleasantly windy that the landscape architecture included these metal structures that looked like cages to protect the trees. I'll let this dry for a moment, then we can pull off the tape and get started painting the river. When Celine and Jessie make it to the Seine, their conversation takes a turn toward reality. Instead of flirty, philosophical takes, they talk about Jessie's wife and Celine's boyfriend. This has the effect of dampening the romantic vibes between them. They decide to take a tourist boat to meet Jessie's ride to the airport. As the boat goes down the Seine, each one reveals that even though their jobs are going well and they are each partnered, neither one of them is okay. In fact, they both are depressed and have a lot of personal dissatisfactions. Each one reveals how much the memories of their first encounter have impacted their other relationships. My dissatisfaction on the 2009 trip wasn't because of something bad that happened in Paris. I had planned the trip because I needed to escape from my life. I was unhappy in the city where I lived. I was unhappy and stressed at my job. I was flailing around, looking for a life-changing purpose, and none was materializing, no matter what I did or how hard I looked. I thought if I took a trip to a place I had enjoyed in the past, I could bask in the glow of those wonderful memories and get some relief, at least for a week. I didn't get that relief. I'm pulling off this last section of tape so I can work on the river wall. When Jesse and Celine get off the river cruise, the driver is there to take Jesse to the airport, and for a moment, the magic of their intimacy seems dispelled. But Jesse doesn't want their time together to end just yet, and he convinces Celine to accept a ride to her apartment. As they talk in the car, Celine gets very upset and feels that her romanticization of their past and what could have been stopped her from fully engaging with her current life. Jesse confesses he has dreams about her while his marriage is falling apart. Neither one of them have been able to move beyond the memories of their night together into the real and immediate things that were happening in their lives. I'm nervous to start painting the trees, so I'm going to work out the spacing with their reflections in the river first. They'll be much easier to correct that way if I need to. I didn't feel better after my trip to Paris. When I thought about the good memories from my previous times in the city, they just highlighted how low I was at that point in my life. My grayer memories of the 2009 trip made me reconsider how I was approaching travel overall. If I was using travel to escape the realities of my life back home, any relief I did get would be short-lived and definitely wouldn't solve larger problems I was having. Now I'll start placing those trees. When they arrive at Celine's apartment, both characters seem to feel a closer connection to each other because of the difficult truths they shared in the car. As they walk through a charming courtyard up to Celine's apartment, the romantic vibes return. Celine and Jesse's walk through Paris gave them a chance to re-enter their memories, ones they were both afraid of losing. They're both giddy with getting to share the memories of that pivotal moment with each other and experiencing those feelings again. But the romantic vibes they were feeling didn't return for me as I watched. I haven't been back to Paris since that trip. With the lovely memories of my first visits now existing alongside less glowing ones, Paris hasn't been the first place on my list to revisit. I did end up making a lot of changes in my life after that trip. Within 6 months, I had left the job and the place I was living for a new city and new prospects. Those definitely were the right choices for me then. Years went by, and vacation time was tighter, so travel was closer to home, if it happened at all. Then travel ground to a halt for several years after COVID hit. Recently, I have started to take trips again. What hasn't happened, however, is a desire to experience the uncomplicated excitement of my earlier travels. It turns out I'm not interested in re-entering those memories as a way to escape the current difficulties in my life. I'm doing a little more shading on the river wall and bank, and then I'm going to add some dimension to the water's surface. Before sunset ends, without any definitive answers about how Celine and Jesse's relationship will turn out, but there is definitely a feeling of romantic anticipation. I know the film wouldn't have been as successful as it was if it hadn't ended with the possibility of romance. I just wish their connection had a stronger grounding in the reality of their current selves, instead of relying so heavily on the shared memories of their earlier experiences. Let's remove the framing tape. So here's the finished painting. And here's the still from before sunset. It's interesting that I gave up on my initial use of interference violet, because the still is definitely way more purpley than what I've painted. However, the gray of the painting does match my memory of how I felt in 2009. I do really like the way the iridescent and interference paints catch the light, like the sun coming out for a moment on a typically cloudy day in Paris. It makes me hopeful about future memories I may make there someday. Thanks so much for sticking with me to the end. This one was a bit different for me, but I enjoyed putting it together. If you have any recommendations for movies with quality walking scenes, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.